Okay, great. In our previous session, we covered basics of JavaScript, like, we talked about global scope, we talked about functions, objects, just general topics about JavaScript basics. But in this session, what we are going to do, in the first half of the session, we are going to cover more JavaScript basics. And as we go on, they get more and more advanced in compared with the topics that we covered in our previous session. And in the second half of the session, we're going to go through the basics of Angular.js, if that works for you.
Yeah, absolutely.
So great. So one thing that I want to add to my if is, do you remember this? We talked about it before.
Yes, these are the ifs, the self-contained, self-invoking
functions. Immediately invoke function expressions. So there's one quick thing that I could add here. If you run Node.js, you have global, if you remember that, as the global object. And if it is in browser, we have window. But to make it work the same, what you could do this. You could pass this keyword and receive the global object as the for only argument of your function. If you go through some advanced code in JavaScript, let's just try this. Let's alerts, for instance, or let's just console log global now. If we do that, and now if we go back to here and refresh this, as you see, what we have in console is the window object. Do you see this? Let me see if I can. Yeah, it's not. It should be better now. You should.
Yeah, no, I can see it.
Okay, great. So now this code works the same in Node and JavaScript. Now, what is this keyword? In JavaScript, in every single, in every function or in every single line of JavaScript code, when you use this, it could has a different value. Let's try this. Let's create a function like print name. So what I'm going to do, I'm not going to send a parameter. Or the first one, let's just send a parameter. What we could do, we could send an object, and this function could simply do this, console.log object.name, for instance. Now let's create an object where on obj equals this. Now if we pass a name here, let's just say this. Now if I call print name and pass obj, we both know what is going to happen, right? We are going to see my lovely object in console. Here we go. But now what I'm going to do here, I'm going to remove object from the argument and change it to something like this. What do you think happens now if I do this?
So it's going to print the window object. Should be printing the global object.
This is exactly the point. If you use this, use a strict here in a strict mode, and let's see what happens now. As you see, this cannot read the property name of undefined. Let me remove this. And as you see, there is no error, right? So what is the difference between this use strict or let me do something here. Let's do this. Window.name equals window. If I remove this user strict, we are going to have window, the string. But if I add this, what we are going to have is this error. The point about this function is this is not a valid JavaScript code. Yes, in old version of, our almost not in old version, in every JavaScript engine, it works. Unless you add user strict. We have two different modes, strict mode or regular mode. In a strict mode, what user strict does, it disables the bad practices in JavaScript. One of those bad practices is to use this in a function, to use the this keyword inside a function where you are not supposed to use. Okay, is there any way that we could call print name with a valid scenario? Yes, there is. Let's do that. We could call a function instead of by adding a pair of parentheses, just by calling call. Now, what we could do, we could pass it a context. We could pass a this context to a function like obj. Now, with user strict here, let's see what happens. There is no error, and I have my lovely object. Let's change the obj to window. Here we go. There is no error, and we have this window. So, did you understand what happened here?
Yeah, this is because you're passing the object as an argument to the print name function.
So the point here is, do you see any argument inside the function?
No, there is no argument.
There is no argument. So this object that we pass to call is not the argument. This is the value of this context of that function. So let me put it this way. In more, do you have any background in other programming languages?
No, not much.
So let's say in C++ or in C# or PHP, all of the well-known, or J2E Java, we have something called class.
Okay.
And when you use a class, it allows you to model something, model a concept. And afterward, what you could do, you could use new against that class and instantiate a new object based on that model that you have created. In Java and in more structured programming languages like C#, Java, and others that I just mentioned, the only way that you could use this keyword is inside a class. But in JavaScript is not actually, it doesn't have class, but what it has, it supports this keyword with a really, with a quite different way. You could provide a function with this value. So if you simply call a function like with a pair of parentheses at the end, it means that the value of this inside that function is going to be the global window. Or if you use user strict, it's going to be undefined. But if you call that function instead of using pair of parentheses with call, you could say that function, you could let that function know, okay, this is this concept, this context that you could use for this keyword inside you know, your body.
Okay, it indicates to the when you call the function itself, it provides the function the information that this refers to that specific object.
Exactly. So what? Yeah, right here we could do anything we want. We could just write the object like this,
Okay.
literal, and say, give it whatever we want to.
Yeah.
And let's comment this out. Using call, the first argument that you pass to the call is not the actual argument of the function. It is the value of the this keyword inside that function. So does it help? Is it a helpful thing to be able to change the this keyword of a function? Yes, it is. In JavaScript, we need it a lot. In a lot of cases, using call helps us to do a lot of great things, like I'm going to show you, like what. But before I go for some advanced scenarios, I'm going to show you how this one works. Okay, Luca. Now, what if the function has also a parameter? Let's add an argument, argument, something like this. So, yeah, let's just do this. Let's just concatenate them together. The value of name and the argument that you pass. So if I don't pass anything, the value of argument would be undefined. And because I'm adding that to a string, what we are going to end up having is Luca space undefined, as you see. But if I want to pass a value now, the way that call works is that you have to pass, just disregard the first argument. Then you could just consider using call that passing arguments starts from the second one. That's it. So all you have to do is just to pass here.
So the first argument is always the object or the information, the reference that we want to pass to that function to tell what this will point to.
Exactly. The first object is always the value of this, and the second, and the actual list of parameters passed to the function starts from the second parameter. Okay, let's try this. As you see now, we have it like this. Make sense?
Yeah.
So you could pass more than one parameter. So here we could just pass, whatever we want to, something. And let's say we have arg0, arg1, and we want to print them all. Arg0 plus arg1. Now, what we are going to have is something like this. So, is it the only way that you could call a function to provide the value of this? No, there is another one which is quite similar, but the way that you could pass the arguments is different. All I have to do is just to copy this code. Instead of call, you would have apply. It does the same exact thing. The first parameter is the value of this, but to pass the list of arguments, you have to pass an array, a list. So that's how you could pass the list of parameters that you have. Here we go. They work exactly the same. Now, let me show you how this is going to help. So, in JavaScript, one of the pseudo variables that we have without us defining it is called arguments. Let me show you. Let me comment out this part for now. and come here. So if I do something like this, console.log arguments. As you see, there is no arguments defined anywhere. Now, if I just call this function main and don't pass it anything, let's see what happens. You see, it just prints a function and prints something in the console. Let me call main with an actual argument, 1 and 2. Here we go. Do you see the 1 and 2 here?
Mm-hmm.
So the point about this object is argument is not defined anywhere by you as a developer. It is already there. It is a pseudo variable. It is always there. Whenever you have a function, you also have an argument, which is not an array, but it acts like an array.
Mm-hmm.
So it has the length or attribute similar to an array, but it's not an array.
So arguments is a keyword in this moment.
Yeah, exactly. Argument is it's a key. It's a keyword, but it actually has a value, and the value contains the list of arguments passed to your function. Even though I haven't passed anything, I haven't received anything in the signature of my function,
mm-hmm.
but I can still have the list of arguments passed to that function. So let's say if you are familiar with any programming language, any more structural programming languages, as I mentioned before, almost in none of them you can find something like this, because when you define, the only way to have access to an argument of the method or a function that you have defined is to actually define something as the argument here. But if you don't pass anything, it means that method or function doesn't receive any arguments. But in JavaScript, it's not the case. What you could do, you could simply do this. You could do something like this: console.log argument 0 plus arguments 1. Now let's say what happens now. As you see, prints 3. You see,
okay.
I didn't pass any parameter to the function in the signature of the function, but now this way I could have access to the actual parameters passed to the function. Make sense?
Yeah.
So now, in some cases, we need to do something. For instance, we need to be able to convert that. So argument, as I said, arguments object doesn't actually have the arrays functions. Like each array has something like slice. It also has, all the different functions. If you define an array, let me see. If you create an array like this, each array has a lot of different helper functions like this: a slice, a splice, array.
All the methods that are part of the array object.
So yeah, now what I want to do, I want to call the slice of array instead of calling, because my object doesn't have a slice, but it has almost everything that an array has, but it doesn't have the slice. Okay, how it could work is simply like this. I could define an array, an empty array, and I know that it has a slice function. Now I'm going to change the value of this using call. and I'm going to pass arguments to as the this value of that slice call. Now, the way that it acts is as though you have called the slice against arguments, not that empty array. So what happens now? Let's say I'm going to slice from 1. Let's see what happens now. Yeah, to do this. Let's do something. Let's return the value, and here let's make this function global. Global.main equals main. Now let's just reload the page. Okay, now I have the main function here. If I pass 1, 2, 3, 4, what do you think this function returns?
Should return as, yeah.
It returns 2, 3, 4. Exactly.
Because you sliced it, isn't it?
Exactly. Let me show you. If I define an array like this, 1, 2, 3, 4, and I do this array.slice 1, this is what I'm going to see. 2, 3, 4. This is exactly the same thing that I saw here, because slice actually converted my arguments object to an array and sliced that from index 1. If I want to just simply, just simply convert that argument to an actual array, I could just remove this 1 from here. Now, whatever I pass as the argument list here, for instance, something like this, you see the return value result equals this. I could do this, result instance of array true. You see what happens here? The arguments is not an actual array. Is there a way to find out? Yes, let's try this. Console.log arguments instance of array. So now if I reload the page and just call this function, you see the false here, which means arguments is not an array, but return value. Okay, if we have a function like this, print name, and in not as its parameter, but using this keyword, you do this console.log this.name, then, as I said before, if you call the print this function like this, it's going to just return either the name of the window object if you have attached any, or if you do this in a strict mode, it's going to throw an exception. But if you do this obj, there is different ways to attach a function or to provide the value of this. Using call and apply is one of them. The other one is this, obj name. And what is the value of this? Let's just say, again, my lovely object. Now, if I do this, if I attach the function to this object like this, print name equals print name. Now, if I call the print name here, obj dot print name like this, the value of this inside the print name function would be obj. So now it is changing. So if you don't use call or apply, when calling a function, if that function is attached to an object, the value of this keyword would be the same object that you have attached that function to. But if you call just that function without attaching that function to anything, then you have a problem. The problem that we mentioned before, either window, global, or undefined, or exception. So
did we actually, in this specific case, did we actually assign the print name method or function to the object,
exactly.
to the obj?
So let me comment everything out. So to be able to run the code, yeah, let's run the code in console mode src index. Let's see what happened. Obj.print name is not a function. Ouch, I have called that function here. Let's call it again. Here we go. You see that? My lovely object. Why? Mm-hmm. Because we attached the print name to that obj.
Okay, so now
it is as though you have created a class, and that class has an attribute name and has a method called print name.
Okay, so the this inside the print name will refer to the object class.
Exactly to the same object that you have on the left side of your function.
Okay.
So now the other way to use this is using functions. This way is more modern. Let's do this. Person. If you want to, implement something, if you want to model a concept in JavaScript, instead of class keyword, you could use function in JavaScript. All you have to do is just to use it. You see, the P is in capital. It's not. It's not just it is a conventional naming. It doesn't mean that you have to name it this way. It is better because it makes your code more readable. That if you use the first name in capital, it means that that function is going to be used as a class constructor or as a constructor function. Mm-hmm. So if I do this now, this dot name Luca. Now if I do var person equals new person. And by the way, I could also do this. This dot print name equals function return this dot name. Print name, which means console.log. Okay. Now it's much more, I guess, readable. You create the object and you call person.printName, and this makes more sense to you because you are the one who models the person class, person model, and once the class it is initiated using new keyword, the result of it is just a simple object. That the thing that I wanted you to know here is that new keyword in JavaScript is not a big deal. What it does, it just creates an object. Mm-hmm. You could use the same thing. You see that here, person.print name. You could achieve the same thing without using new keyword. But mm-hmm. using new keyword, you could use some syntactic sugars like prototypes here, mm-hmm. person.prototype, like print name in, for instance, capital. Let's say we've got another method. You could add a new method to your function. Here, console.log. If it is a string, that's and what was that? Just a name dot to uppercase. Now we have two different ways to attach a function to an object using a class model. One is to define the function inside your constructor this way.
Mm-hmm.
The other way is to attach that function to the prototype of the function. Now, person is going to have both of those methods. Person dot print name in capital. Let's see if it works. Here we go. Luca. You see this?
Yeah.
So that's what you should learn more about, because using prototypes is exactly, there is a practice in Angular.js that is a really popular one, using what we call as controller as. Using controller as solutions, controllers are similar to this person function, are just functions, and whatever you add to the prototype of that function is going to end up inside your controller. Then you could have access to that inside your Angular.js template. So I'm going to give you more time until the next session to learn by yourself, learn how prototype works, why in which cases we could use call, or why we should use call or apply. And but I guess that's enough for now. What I'm going to do is just to cover Angular.js for the second half of the session, if you don't have any questions for now.
No, I thought I understood when I was watching the regards of the prototype object of a specific function, but the only thing that wasn't clear to me is about the .call and .apply part of it, which in both cases to use the not. That's probably what I need to.
So you know that how call or apply work, but you don't know why they actually exist.
Mm-hmm.
So
exactly.
What is the reason behind the existence? Why we have to have them, and how they are going to help us, right? So
exactly.
One thing that I could say to help you understand it is because JavaScript is not a structural language. JavaScript is considered more a dynamic functional programming language. It is, you could implement object-oriented practices, but it's not at all something similar to C++ or C or C# or Java. Because in Java, if you have a method, it means that method is already, the compiler knows the signature of that function. But in JavaScript, if you have a function, no one knows how that function is going to be called, because you could call every function in JavaScript with whatever argument that you want to pass. So if you create a function, you could pass it one argument or millions of arguments, and that is going to work. Nothing is going to break unless you, as a developer, throw an exception in your code. For instance, what you could do type checking. For instance, if you want to have something similar to C#, you have to either use something that we call is TypeScript, which is based on JavaScript, but it adds types to JavaScript. Using TypeScript, you could define specific signatures for your functions. Then, in that case, whenever you see a function, you know how that function is going to be called. But in real-world JavaScript, at the end, JavaScript is just typeless, is dynamic, and functions are dynamic lambdas that you could pass whatever you want to them. You could use one single function for different types of functionality, which is not a good practice though, but you could do that. The point behind this is we have different objects, different types of behaviors in a really loose and dynamic way in JavaScript. So we have a lot of different types of objects similar to array, which is not an actual array, but we need those functions to call, but we don't have those helper functions. So the only way to call them is just to somehow change the context of this using call or apply. There are other use cases for call or apply. And if you could take a look, if you could look it up by yourself, in the next session, you could ask me more questions about it. But right now, I wanted to stop here and go for Angular basics.
Yeah, it's fine. It's fine. Let's go for Angularjs. It's good.
Okay. So far, I guess you have a big picture in mind about Angularjs, right?
Yes.
So can you describe it to me?
So I haven't. Sorry, did I say that? I haven't really started with Angularjs. I was waiting for us to have this this specific session so we could go through around what Angularjs is and how. The thing I understood pretty much is that it helps with the communication between JavaScript and external.
Yeah, exactly. It is a framework based on JavaScript. It allows you to create single-page applications, and it allows you to create advanced JavaScript web applications using a specific pattern, similar to what you could find as MVC or MVVM or MVP. And that's why we call it MV star. MV star means model view whatever, or whatever you could add to that pattern, because we have different patterns like MVC. MVC stands for model view controller, and we have MVVM, which stands for model view, and at the end we have the VM, which stands for view model.
Mm-hmm.
So here we have MVP, model view presenter. So these are different patterns, but you cannot, if you learn about MVC, you would say that Angularjs is not exactly MVC. It follows similar concepts, but it's not exactly the same. That's why you should learn what Angularjs is instead of learning first what MVC is, although it's going to help. And this is highly recommended for you to go and look for a book that I'm going to send it to you. The link is...
So are we not going to study Angularjs but MVC or whatever?
So yeah, I'm going to send a link to you about a book from Adi Osmani called JavaScript Design Patterns. One of the design patterns described in this book is MVC, and you could find more design patterns at this link. Yes, let me see if I can send it to you. So, if you have time, please go and read this book as much as you could, because it's it's not it's not a small book. Okay, let's go back here. About Angularjs. Angularjs has different concepts to implement the design pattern that we just discussed, MVC or something similar to MVC. Angularjs has modules. The first concept that you should learn about Angularjs, to create, let me put it here as notes. The first thing that you should do when you create an AngularJS application is to create or to define a module. And inside that module, you could now have different things, like inside a module, you could have a controller. So the controller, you could also then define your view layer, views, and views in AngularJS, when you say view, what it usually means is your AngularJS templates. But that's, the point. Every single one of these concepts are sort of, vague if you want to compare them with MVC, because what MVC offers, if you just take a look at this terminology, MVC says we have two different parts. First is the model. In model, you have to create your model. The model of your application, your module, your object. In your view layer, you have to define the presentation layer, the part that there are user interactions. And in your controller layer, you have to manage the user actions. And then using controllers, a view receives the user interactions, passes them to controllers, and then controllers could update the model. So this is the way. View doesn't have access to model. View triggers something in controller, and controller changes the model. But in AngularJS, we actually don't have all of this structure. What we have is the main concept of an AngularJS application is a module, and inside that module, and each module could be considered one piece of your application or the whole piece of your application, the main piece of your application. And inside that module, you could have a controller, you could have an AngularJS template, you could have different, other different concepts like services. You could have, or services or factories, they are actually very similar, or you could consider them the same. Services, factories, just utility libraries. And you could also have directives. So now, let's see how we could set up an AngularJS application, right? Let's just create a new, another application, an Angular-app. So here, I'm going to cd to that Angular app. What I'm going to do here is to do something. I'm going to use Bower, because Bower is really, I don't have it. Let's use Npm Install Angular. Instead of going and downloading, let's just first do this. I just created the package.json here. Now what I'm going to do is just say npm install Angular, save it as a dependency. This is instead of what I did at this moment. What you could also do is just go to the AngularJS website and download Angularjs. And if you look at this folder node module, what I did was exactly the same. I just downloaded Angularjs using this command that I just used. Mm-hmm. So you see this node module. Inside that, I have an Angular folder, and there is an Angularjs here. So this process is much easier. That's why I use this. Npm is a package manager, and Angular is a package that we want to manage or we want to use in our application. Let's now create an HTML file, index. Yeah, index. That would be good enough. Angular app. So first thing now, let's create a new JavaScript file, app.js. Before we start coding, what we have to do, we have to add the Angularjs script tag to the page. SRC. So in this case, we don't want to be, you know, that fancy, and we are going to just directly use the Angularjs from here. Okay, Angularjs. Okay, now we added the Angularjs to the page. What we could do now is just to add the app.js. Now, inside this app.js, what we could do, if you remember, whatever you want to do, whatever code you want to run in browser, first thing that you should do is to define an if. Okay, I just did. Now, Angular, when you use Angular, if you remember, I said we could define global variables, right? When you use Angularjs application, Angular itself has defined one single global variable, which is called Angular. So the whole Angularjs framework doesn't have any other global variables. So that's one of the use cases. For instance, when you want to implement a library, then it makes sense to have one single global variable to provide provide the developers who want to use your framework with the functionalities that you want to provide them with. So here, Angular is a global object. Now, the first thing that we have to do is to define a module. The way that we could define a module using Angularjs is just simply like this. Angular.module, we have to pass it two different parameters. First is the name of the module. What is the name of this module here? Let's say Angular app. Okay. What is the second parameter? The second parameter is the list of dependencies. What does it mean? It means that if you have other Angular modules, this is how you could just organize your application. Let's say you have a specific list of components used in different Angular modules that you have. What you could do create another module, let's say components, and then add whatever you want to add to that module. And then in order to use those components, what you have to do, you have to add their module as a dependency to your module definition. So at this moment, so we don't actually have anything, but I'm going to show you how it actually works later. So that's why I don't have any definition for my module, right? You see this? There's no definition. What we could do here is we could define a controller. The way that we could define a controller in Angularjs is simply like this. You could pass it the name of the controller. Okay, let's use the controller name like main controller. And let's pass it a function. This function is your controller. Now, okay, Oh, let's just make it more readable. Create a function here and use that function. Put in function name here. Now, this code, I believe, is much more readable. Okay, there is one one attribute, or less, what is it? One object in Angular.js called scope, that every single controller has one scope that you could use to do what? To attach something to that. So let's just say every controller has a scope. And for you to have access to that scope, you have to add a variable name, you have to add a parameter name to your function with exactly the same name as I just used, $scope. Now, if I do this, $scope dots, let's go with title, my first Angular application. Okay, this is a title, so it's not a big deal. The controller function, so far so good. And as I said, each controller in Angular.js has a scope. Now, if I go to my index.html and do this, ng app equals Angular app, and here ng controller equals main controller. Now I have access to that scope like this, h1. What was that? Title. Let's run this index.html. You see, my first Angular application. This is the first thing that you should learn about Angular.js. How did this work? What is the explanation that you have for this so far?
Is that, let me see if yeah, we have created the controller and the module for the Angularjs application, and we've linked utilizing these classes to the HTML page, and we have accessed them. So
this is what you see in line number 8. You see 2 curly brackets.
Yeah.
It means, this is a syntax of a template language, and here Angular.js has its own HTML template syntax, which in this title that we have here means that this comes from $scope of the first controller, first parent controller. So you see this h1 here? Yep. Its parent element is body. And it has ng controller, main controller. So inside this main controller, we have $scope. And that $scope has an attribute called title. That's why we could use that title like this. So if I, for instance, do this, div, and move this ng controller from here to this div tag. So do you think it is going to work now?
No, it shouldn't be.
It shouldn't work because title should be inside your controller. So if I want this to be working, I have to move this here.
Yeah.
Okay, now it works, but if I do this, it's not going to work. So it's not. But if I move it right, you know, like this, yes, it works. So the point behind this is that you could define different controllers for one single HTML page. The first use case is that the usual one that we usually have is for every single page application, we usually have one root Angular module. And in this case, the Angular module, the main Angular module that we have is Angular App. The one that you add to your HTML to your HTML tag. Do you have to add Angular App to HTML tag? No, you could add it to whatever you want it. And let me just do this. You could move this to, let's just create another div tag. And I could put it right here. But again, if I want this controller to be part of my Angular app, I have to move it like this to the inside of the tag. Make sense?
Okay, yeah.
So
now, can you please tell me a little bit, because I think we've got the last 10 minutes now. 6 o'clock, I'm afraid I need to finish. What do you use in real world Angular.js for? What is the utilization of it?
Okay, so first off, Angular.js now has different versions. The old-fashioned one that we are using right now is called Angular 1.
Mm-hmm.
We have Angular 2 and 4 now, mm-hmm. And Angular 4 is the latest one, which is actually similar to 2. 2 and 4 are quite the same. You could consider them something that are similar, but after, you know, Angular 1, we didn't have a huge change for a couple of years, and then suddenly Angular 2 showed up. If you want to learn Angular as a developer, it's a good idea to start from Angular 1, but for your, you know, for your future's sake, it's better for you to be fast and go for Angular 2, you know, as fast as possible. And the type of project that we usually use Angular for is, for instance, enterprise web applications. So we could use Angular.js to create websites, mm-hmm. But Angular 1 had a lot of issues. For instance, one of the issues that it had was related to server-side rendering. For us to enable server-side rendering using Angular.js, we had to go through a really painful process. But now using Angular 2 or 4, we have a much easier process to set up server-side rendering. And server-side rendering is something that is really important for search engine optimization, SEO, SEO, you know, purposes. Mm-hmm. That's why the type of applications that usually have SEO don't use Angular.js. Now, these days, again, because of the new features of Angular 2 and 4, we could do that, but it is still the same pattern usually. For those type of projects, we usually use React or Vue.js, but for Angular.js, the Angularjs application, the first page that you usually have is a login page for you to log into an application, a real application similar to a desktop application, a single page application which has different routes. For instance, you could go and create users, you know, you could manage your organization inside your application. As I said, enterprise applications. Or the type of applications that users should log into. The reason is Angular.js is, you know, using this MVC pattern, and using MVC allows developers to develop much faster in compare with other patterns like Flux using React or Redux. So in one side, we have Angular.js, MVC, which allows us to set up, structural application. In the other side, we have Flux, React.js, and Redux, which allows us to set up applications which are really fast in terms of memory. Using Angular.js, one of the issues that you usually have is to be careful about memory leaks, because if you don't know what you are doing, you are going to end up creating applications with memory leaks. Because the way that Angular.js achieves what I just showed you, having $scope in your controller and an HTML template on the other side, they are bound together using what we call two-way data binding. What it does, it checks like crazy, it runs crazy checking, type checkings and function observers to make sure that it could detect every single change in the controller or inside the Angularjs template. So to do this, Angularjs has to run a lot of code, under the hood. And if you don't know what you are doing, again, you could create a mess. The first thing is, if you want to learn Angularjs, you have to first learn how MVC works, and then how Angularjs style of MVC works, and then go for Angular 2. And yeah, I guess I'm not sure if I have answered your questions thoroughly.
Yes, can you repeat again one more? What is MVC again?
MVC, Model
MVC.
View Controller.
Okay.
Yeah, if you get my link, the one that I sent to you.
Yeah.
About a book from this one, Learning JavaScript Design Patterns.
Yeah.
It has almost all of it. All of the different design patterns. JavaScript MVC. This one, MVC patterns. It starts from Smalltalk 80. So it dates back to 1980. The first time that we hear about MVC dates back to, I guess, 30 or 40 years ago, 37 years ago. Smalltalk MVC. So you could read this part to learn what is the original MVC here. And the other is MVC for JavaScript developers, models, and the other framework that we used to use was Backbone. Backbone was not similar to Angularjs, but it was just similar because it had used MVC pattern. Other than this pattern, there was no similarity between AngularJS and Backbone. So Backbone was a very similar, very popular framework. Excuse me, just library. It's not a framework, actually. It's a really lightweight library allowing you to create controllers, models for your applications. And that's what you could learn in this book about different types of MVC patterns.
So what these MVC patterns are used for?
To create applications, to create JavaScript applications, to create JavaScript single-page applications. So the point about this is, after jQuery, we had a lot of great JavaScript frameworks allowing us to create almost whatever we want to using JavaScript. jQuery was the first one that made a historical change because it allowed us to do a lot of things. After jQuery, we had Backbone, we had then Angularjs, now we have React, I cannot even, remember all of them because it's a really huge list. So the point about behind these frameworks is that you could create, for instance, back then in 10 years ago, we had one media player in Windows, an application. But now we could have the same exact player inside our browsers without you having to install anything in your operating system. You could simply have that application inside your browser. So, and now these days, I cannot even imagine any applications that you cannot create using JavaScript inside your browser. You could do almost anything inside your browser. So web was not meant to be this, was not meant to be for creating applications. It was just for, you know, documents or just websites, like, I don't know. And the first huge, for instance, website which with a lot of features was google.com. Other websites were like something like Wikipedias or a lot of information without any interactive features. But nowadays, even Wikipedia has a lot of interactive features. So the point is, now using web, web is becoming almost the new operating system that we have. We don't care if it is Windows or Linux. All we need is just a single browser to do whatever we want to do. Make sense?
Yeah, makes sense.
So using Backbone, using Angularjs, we could create those applications, those advanced applications, to run inside this object, inside this window in your browser. So that's why we use Angularjs usually or React or other JavaScript frameworks.